I watched 5 men die in less than 4 minutes. Not from a bear attack, not from a hunting accident, not from anything the wilderness normally throws at you. I watched them die at the hands of something that shouldn't exist, something that moved through our camp with the precision of a surgeon and the brutality of a demon. And the worst part is, whatever killed them looked me straight in the eye afterward and let me live. My hands are shaking even as I write this. It's been 2 years since that night in the Cascades, and I still wake up screaming. I still see those eyes intelligent, almost human, staring at me from a face out of a nightmare. I still hear the wet, tearing sounds as it cut down 5 seasoned hunters, one by one, like they were nothing more than insects. They wanted me to stay silent. The men in black suits, who showed up 3 months after the attack, made that very clear. They erased the evidence, silenced the witnesses, and sealed off the valley so no civilian would ever set foot there again. But I can't stay quiet anymore, not when I know what's out there. Not when I know it's still watching, still waiting, still guarding its territory against anyone foolish enough to push too deep into places where humans were never meant to go. My name is Trent Williams, and I'm the only one left alive who knows the truth about what happened in Elk Bowl that October night. I used to be a wildlife photographer and hunting guide. At 54, I'd spent more than half my life in these mountains, leading expeditions for clients willing to pay top dollar to experience the wilderness in relative safety. I prided myself on my systematic approach on getting people home alive from terrain that could kill the unprepared in an instant. But nothing could have prepared me for what stepped out of the tree line at 11:07 p.m. on October 15th. Nothing could have prepared me for the slaughter that followed. And nothing could have prepared me for the realization that we are not alone in these wild places, that some things have been watching us far longer than we've ever known. The group I was guiding that week was a familiar type. 5 businessmen from Seattle, all in their 40s and 50s, experienced hunters who had been on trips together for years. There was a tech executive with a steady hand and good instincts, a construction company owner who knew terrain like the back of his hand, a finance guy with deadly accuracy behind a rifle, a real estate developer who treated hunting like another business venture, and finally, a surgeon whose skill with a gun matched the precision of his scalpel. They'd hired me to take them into a spot the locals call Elk Bowl, a remote valley 8 miles into the backcountry, reachable only by a brutal hike through thick forest. The place was known for its elk herds, but more importantly for my business, it was far enough off the grid to give my clients the thrill of a true wilderness adventure while still being under my watch. The first day and a half went exactly as planned. We made the trek in, set up base camp on a clearing I'd used dozens of times before, and everyone was in good spirits. They spotted a few elk at a distance, the October weather was crisp, the skies were clear, and visibility was perfect. Conditions like that made my job easier and kept the clients happy. It was around 4 p.m. on the second day that I realized something was wrong. We were setting up our second camp about 2 miles from the valley, getting ready for the final day of hunting. The guys were laughing, pitching tents, unpacking gear. That's when it hit me. I hadn't heard a single bird call in over an hour. At first, I brushed it off. 5 men talking, hammering tent stakes, the usual camp noise. It was enough to spook the smaller animals. But when I stopped moving, really listened, I knew this was different. The forest was dead silent, no birdsong, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. In 12 years as a guide, I'd only experienced silence like that 3 times. Twice, it was a grizzly passing through. Once, a mountain lion. Big predators have a way of making a forest go still. The smaller creatures know when danger is near, but this silence, it felt different. It felt bigger. I called out to the group, keeping my voice casual, suggesting we take a short break while I checked the perimeter. The tech exec looked up from unrolling his sleeping bag, puzzled. I explained that the woods had gone quiet, which usually meant a predator was moving nearby. The men exchanged glances, and I could see the mix of concern and excitement in their eyes. This was exactly the kind of raw wilderness moment they had paid for, the thrill of being somewhere where apex predators still ruled. The construction guy's hand instinctively went to his rifle as he asked what kind of predator it might be. I shrugged, told them it could be a bear, maybe a lion, or maybe nothing at all. But my gut told me otherwise. I asked for 10 minutes to scout the clearing, and as I circled the perimeter, the unease only grew. This silence wasn't just unusual, it was absolute. I've spent plenty of time in bear country, and while big predators can silence an entire forest, there's usually still some background noise. The wind through the trees, the distant call of a jay, the scurry of small animals. This time was different. It was as if every living thing within a mile had suddenly decided to hold its breath. I was about 50 yards from camp, near a small stream running along the northern edge of the clearing, when I saw them, tracks pressed into the soft earth along the water's edge. At first glance, they looked like bear prints, broad, with what seemed to be claw marks. But when I knelt down for a closer look, the blood drained from my face. These weren't bear tracks. They were human, clearly human, but impossibly large. Each print was at least 18 inches long and nearly 8 inches wide, with 5 distinct toes and strange claw-like impressions at the tips. The depth of the tracks suggested something incredibly heavy, far beyond any human weight, and the stride length, the spacing between them, there was no denying it. Whatever made these tracks had been walking upright, on 2 legs. I pulled out my camera and snapped photos from every angle, making sure to include my own boots for scale. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe they were distorted barefoot prints in the soft ground. Maybe they were old tracks, eroded into unusual shapes. Maybe it was an elaborate hoax, though I couldn't imagine anyone hauling fake track molds 8 miles into this wilderness just to prank random hunters. And in my gut, I felt something entirely different. In 12 years as a guide, I'd heard countless stories from locals and fellow outdoorsmen, tales of encounters with something they couldn't explain. Giant, 2-legged creatures moving through the forest with intelligence and purpose. I'd always dismissed those accounts as folklore, mistakes, or exaggeration. But staring at these prints, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. I brought the photos back to camp, forcing my face to stay calm. The men were gathered around a small stove, boiling water for coffee and snacks. I showed them the images on my camera screen, casually explaining that I'd found the tracks by the stream and thought they might be worth a look. Their reactions came instantly and varied. The tech executive leaned in, analyzing the shots with trained focus. The construction boss let out a low whistle. The finance guy laughed. The real estate developer shook his head. The surgeon stayed silent, studying the images with the same concentration he'd give to an operating table. The tech exec commented on their size, asked where I thought they came from. I flipped through the photos again, admitting honestly that I wasn't sure. Too big for any known animal in these mountains, too human-like for a bear, too deep for a person. The finance guy chuckled again, joking that I couldn't possibly think they were real, that clearly someone was messing with us. I shut that down quickly. We were 8 miles from the nearest trailhead, in country that demanded skill just to reach. Who would haul fake track molds all the way out here just to prank a few random hunters? The developer suggested maybe it was some viral marketing stunt for one of those TV shows about Bigfoot. The construction man looked closer at the camera screen, pointing out how the soil was displaced around the edges, the depth, the density. "If these are fake," he muttered, "someone went to a hell of a lot of trouble." The surgeon finally spoke quietly, almost reluctantly, saying they could very well be real. The group fell silent. That carried weight. The surgeon was the skeptic among them, always approaching things with cold analysis. If he thought these tracks might be genuine, it shook the others. The finance guy pressed the issue, asking if the surgeon was really suggesting Bigfoot was wandering around out here. The surgeon replied that he was suggesting we didn't know what made them, and until we did, maybe we ought to be more careful. I nodded in agreement, suggesting we consider moving camp closer to the main trail for safety. The developer pushed back immediately. They'd been planning this trip for months, and he wasn't about to cut it short because of some strange tracks. I tried to explain that it wasn't about running, it was about being smart. Something big had been here, something I couldn't identify. As the guide, I urged them to adjust the plan accordingly. That sparked a 20-minute argument. The tech exec and the surgeon sided with me. The finance guy and the developer insisted on staying T-LAR. Tôi chờ đợi, mọi dây thần kinh trong cơ thể đều căng thẳng, nhưng không có gì xuất hiện trên màn hình. ChatGPT đã nói. The construction boss seemed torn, and in the end, sided with the majority to stay put. The finance guy finally spoke for the group, saying they appreciated my caution, but they'd paid me to guide a hunt, not to scare them away from good country because of mysterious tracks. If it was a bear, they could handle it. If it was a prank, so be it. If it's Bigfoot, he grinned, then we'll have one hell of a story to tell. Reluctantly, I agreed to stay. They were seasoned hunters and they were paying me well. I told myself I was being overly cautious, that years in the backcountry had sharpened my sense of danger into paranoia. But even after we finished setting camp and settled in for dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the dark. Campfire, the trees, the sun set around 6:30, and we gathered around the small stove for a meal. Everyone joked about the strange tracks and speculated about what might have left them. Still, I noticed the men sat closer together than usual and kept their rifles within reach. As night fell, I set up my night vision cameras. That's part of my routine on most expeditions. Clients like seeing infrared images of wildlife moving through camp after dark tonight. I hope to capture something more specific. If whatever had made those prints remained in the area, my cameras would catch it. Night vision units use thermal signatures to detect movement, and I had 3 positioned around camp at different angles. Anything larger than a squirrel within 100 yards of our position would show up. Around 9 p.m., we doused the fire and everyone retired to their tents. I volunteered for the first watch, following standard predator country procedure. What I didn't tell them was that I wasn't going to sleep. Something felt off. An instinct told me to stay alert. I stood between a tent and a thicket, my back against a large rock with a clear view in every direction. My rifle was loaded and ready, and my camera was within reach. The night was cold and clear, the moon bright enough to make out basic shapes and movement. The first hour was uneventful. I could hear the men shifting in their sleeping bags, the occasional cough or movement. The forest kept that same odd silence, but I was getting used to it. Maybe whatever had left the tracks had moved on. Maybe we'd overreacted. At about 10:30 p.m., my night camera started picking something up. At first, it was only thermal ghosts at the edge of the detection zone, large heat signatures too distant to identify. I watched the monitor as the thermal images moved along the perimeter of our camp, always just outside the camera's clear range. Whatever it was, it moved with purpose. This wasn't aimless animal behavior. A thermal blip would appear on one camera, track steadily in a direction, vanish, then reappear on another camera a few minutes later. It circled our camp, maintaining distance never close enough to be clearly identified, never disappearing for good. My skin prickled. This was predator behavior, but unlike any predator I'd known, bears don't systematically circle a camp like this. Mountain lions ambush. They don't stalk in careful loops. This was different. I considered waking the others, but I wasn't sure what I would tell them, simply that something was moving in the woods. That's not unusual in the backcountry. My cameras picking up a thermal signature could mean any number of things. Without more concrete evidence, I'd risk sounding like a paranoid guide running everyone out of camp. But these movements were too deliberate to ignore. Whatever was out there was intelligent, methodical, and patient. It was studying us, mapping the camp, learning our defenses. This was not ordinary animal behavior. Around 11 p.m., the movement stopped. The thermal signature vanished from my monitors, and the forest fell back into that same strange silence. I waited, every nerve taut, but nothing reappeared on the screen. For a moment, I wondered if whatever was out there had finally moved on. Then I saw it. A silhouette emerged from the brush about 30 yards away, sliding through the night with a silence that was impossible for something so large. Even in the moonlight, I could see how massive it was, at least 9 feet tall, shoulders broader than any man I'd ever seen. It moved upright like a person, but with the lithe, fluid grace of a predator that made my blood go cold. I wanted to shout, a warning, to wake the others, to do something, anything, but my body wouldn't obey. I was frozen by a primitive terror I'd never felt before. This wasn't just fear of a predator. This was the fear of something that shouldn't exist, something that violated every rule of the natural world I thought I understood. The creature stopped at the edge of our clearing, and, just as the thermal cameras had shown, it surveyed the camp with methodical attention. Its head turned slowly from tent to tent, as if taking inventory of every position. When its gaze passed over where I crouched, I held my breath, sure it would see me despite the darkness. But it didn't seem to notice me. Instead, it started moving again, this time with a speed and purpose that was terrifying. It approached the first tent in a glide, so smooth it hardly seemed to touch the ground. I watched in horror as it reached down with one enormous hand and, with one quick motion, collapsed the tent and everything inside. The sound was wet and short. The tech executive didn't even have time to scream. The creature moved immediately to the next tent, without pausing, without hesitation. Another swift motion, another wet sound, another life ended in a matter of seconds. The clinical nature of the attack was almost more frightening than the violence itself. This wasn't rage or hunger, it was execution. The third tent was next. By then, the others were waking, confused by the noise, but not yet understanding what was happening. I heard someone ask what was going on. This time, the man inside was ready. I saw the muzzle flash and heard a sharp shot. The creature staggered, either from the bullet or from surprise. I couldn't tell. It didn't fall. Instead, it produced a low, resonant rumble that seemed to come from deep within its chest. It wasn't a roar or a growl, but something that shook the ground. The finance guy fired another round before the thing closed the distance. The second muzzle flash lit its face for an instant, and what I saw that moment is burned into me forever. Those intelligent eyes, the face almost human, and yet wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. An expression I can only describe as cold, calculated fury. The creature slammed its hand down on the tent with the same quick motion as before, only harder. The wet sound came with the sick crack of breaking bone. Two men were screaming, both clawing to get out of their tents, both searching blindly for weapons. But the creature moved to the next tent with the same terrifying speed. The developer had half unzipped his tent and was trying to crawl out when it reached him. I watched it grab his leg and drag him back into the collapsed canvas. His scream cut off abruptly. The surgeon was last. He'd made it out and had the rifle up, firing, when the creature turned toward him. In the moonlight, I could see his face calm, clinical, the same focus he brought into an operating room. Even facing this nightmare, he approached it methodically. His shot was perfect. At about 15 feet, he put a round squarely into a target the size of a refrigerator. The creature recoiled and black fluid sprayed from the impact site. But it didn't fall. It looked down at the wound, then back at the surgeon, cocking its head almost as if curious. The surgeon was reloading, trying to chamber another round, when the creature closed the gap in 2 ridiculously long strides. What happened next took only seconds, but those seconds seared into my memory with crystal clarity. From the first tent to the last, the entire attack lasted less than 4 minutes. 4 minutes to systematically kill 5 seasoned hunters, each armed and prepared for the hazards of the wild. 4 minutes to shatter everything I thought I knew about the natural world. I was still hiding behind a fallen log. Somehow my camera kept recording. My body remained paralyzed by terror. The creature stood in the middle of our ruined camp, surrounded by the wreckage of 5 tents and 5 lives. It seemed to be listening, its head tilted slightly, as if confirming there were no more threats. Then it turned and looked straight at my hiding place. I don't know how it knew I was there. I didn't move. I made no sound, gave no sign of my position, yet it looked at me with those intelligent, almost human eyes. And I knew with absolute certainty that it could see me as clearly as if it were broad daylight. For what felt like an eternity, we stared at one another across that devastated clearing. I was certain I was about to die, certain I would share whatever fate had just befallen my clients. But the creature did not move. It merely looked at me as if weighing whether I was worth the trouble of killing. Then it opened its mouth and produced a sound I can only try to put into words. Not words I could understand in any language, but a series of low, rumbling tones that carried intent. It was speaking to me, though I had no idea what it was saying. The sound seemed to come from deep in its chest, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. After a span that felt endless, the creature turned its back on me and stepped toward the brush. Its movement remained as fluid and silent as before, but now I could detect a change in its posture, perhaps a sense of satisfaction, a completion of purpose. Just before it vanished into the forest, it stopped and looked back at me. Then it uttered a different series of calls, not the same as before. They sounded almost like a warning, though I can't be sure. Then it was gone, dissolved into the dark as quietly as it had appeared. I don't know how long I stayed pinned behind that log. Minutes, hours, time had lost all meaning. I was trapped in a nightmare my reason could not process, surrounded by evidence of something that should not exist. Eventually, the paralysis began to fade, replaced by a new kind of terror. I was alone in the wilderness, 8 miles from the nearest trailhead with no way to contact the outside world. 5 men were dead, killed by something I could not explain. And I was the only witness to an event nobody would believe. At first light, I found the courage to move. I approached the destroyed camp with my camera in hand and documented everything I could. The scene was worse than my memory. The tents had not merely collapsed, they had been ripped as if by enormous claws. Gear lay scattered and destroyed. I won't describe in detail what I found of the bodies. Suffice to say, the creature had worked with a precision and deliberateness that left nothing random about the attack. This was not the transient violence of an animal. This was a calculated, methodical killing by something intelligent and purposeful. I spent the next hour collecting what I could from the wreckage. My camera gear had survived. The case protected it through the attack. I salvaged a bit of water, some food, and my rifle. The 8-mile walk out across that brutal terrain would have been nothing under normal circumstances. That day, it was the longest 8 miles of my life. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound froze me with dread. I braced myself for that huge silhouette to appear from the trees and for that low, resonant voice to call again. But the forest remained still, as if the natural world itself were stunned by what had happened. I reached the trailhead about 18 hours after the attack, exhausted, dehydrated, and probably in shock. The first person I encountered was a game warden. He looked me over and immediately called for emergency aid. The next few hours blurred into a chaotic series of interviews, questions, and skeptical faces. I told my story to local police, state investigators, federal agents, and dozens of other officials. I showed them my photos, the footage from the camera, and gave a detailed account of what I had witnessed. I provided exact GPS coordinates for the camp and described everything I could remember. The response was immediate and comprehensive. Within hours, helicopters were combing the area. Ground teams were dispatched to investigate. The story started to spread through local law enforcement and emergency services. Then something strange happened. The investigation appeared to stall. Officials who had been asking detailed questions suddenly became evasive. The helicopter flights stopped. The ground teams were pulled back. When I asked for updates, I was told the investigation was ongoing and they would contact me when there was more information. Days passed, then weeks. I reached out to local news outlets, hoping public attention would force the authorities to follow through. At first, a few reporters showed interest, interviewed me, and reviewed my evidence, but none of their pieces ever aired or ran in print. When I followed up, editors told me the stories had been killed, though no one offered an explanation. I contacted national media, cryptozoologists, anyone who might care about the story. Every lead went cold. Phone calls went unanswered. Emails vanished into a digital black hole. It felt like a coordinated effort to keep the story from going public. The attack site was tightly patrolled. Official signs went up declaring the valley a protected wildlife research area, entry restricted to authorized personnel only. Local guides were quietly warned away. Hunters were turned back at the trailhead. The whole valley where 5 men had died effectively became off-limits to the public. I hired a private investigator to look into what had happened to the official inquiry. He returned with worrying news. There were no formal records of the incident, no police reports, no federal investigation files, nothing to indicate 5 men had died in the Cascade backcountry that October. It was as if the entire event had been scrubbed from the official record. The families of the 5 hunters were another mystery. I tried to contact them to offer condolences and to share what I had witnessed. I found it impossible. Phone numbers didn't connect. Addresses led to empty houses. It was as if the men had vanished, not just from life, but from every trace of existence. I began to feel watched. Cars seemed to follow me. Phone calls ended in silence. Strange faces appeared at places I frequented, watching me with an attention that felt personal. I couldn't prove any of it, but the feeling was unmistakable. The breaking point came 3 months after the attack. 2 men in dark suits, claiming to be federal agents, approached me. They didn't show badges or ID, but they knew details about the incident that hadn't been released. They were polite but firm. I was ordered to stop discussing that night. I was told to destroy all the evidence I'd collected. I was told to find new work, ideally far from the Pacific Northwest. They made clear this was not a request. They knew where I lived, where I worked, where I shopped. They knew about my sister in Portland, my ex-wife in San Francisco, my mother in a nursing home in Spokane. They didn't issue an explicit threat, but the implication was clear. If I kept pursuing the story, the people I loved would suffer. I should have resisted. I should have gone public with everything I knew, regardless of the consequences. But I was tired, frightened, and increasingly convinced I was up against forces beyond my understanding. So I complied. I destroyed the evidence, shut down the guiding business, and moved to a small town in Montana where I now do freelance photography for local papers. But I never forgot what I saw that night. I've never stopped believing that somewhere in the remote wilds of the Cascade Range there are creatures moving through the woods that science doesn't recognize and that the government refuses to acknowledge. I've never stopped wondering what the creature was trying to tell me with those low, rumbling calls, or why it spared me when it could have killed me as easily as it killed the others. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that sound in my dreams, the deep, hoarse voice that seems to speak in a language older than human civilization. I wonder whether it was trying to pass along a message, a warning about boundaries not to be crossed, territories not to be invaded, and the consequences of venturing too far into places where humans were never meant to go. The official story, as the public was told, is that 5 Seattle businessmen went missing on a hunting trip in the Cascade Range that October. Search teams tried their best but found no trace. The area where they were last seen was closed off for environmental protection. The case remains open, unsolved. I'm the only one left who knows the truth. 5 seasoned hunters were killed in less than 4 minutes by something that shouldn't exist. The evidence was systematically destroyed or concealed. The investigation was shut down by forces powerful enough to erase official records and silence the media. I don't know if that creature still roams out there. I don't know if there are others like it. I don't know what its motive was, or whether it poses a threat to anyone else foolish enough to invade its territory. What I do know is that we are not alone in the wild, and that some of the beings who share this world with us possess abilities and intelligence we don't yet understand. The vast remote forests of the Pacific Northwest contain millions of acres humans rarely set foot on. If something wants to hide in that wilderness, it can do so indefinitely. And if it decides humans are a threat to its existence, it has the tools and the intellect to remove that threat with terrifying efficiency. For the past 2 years, I've tried to forget what I saw that night. I tried to convince myself it was a nightmare, that my mind had invented grotesque explanations for events that must surely have reasonable causes. But the images are too vivid, the memories too clear, the evidence too compelling. Something is out there, in the wild. A creature that walks upright on 2 legs, 9 feet tall, with intelligence and capabilities beyond our understanding of the natural world. A creature that can kill with precise efficiency, move through the forest in total silence, and may be trying to communicate with us in ways we don't yet comprehend. I don't know what it wants. I don't know what it was trying to tell us. But I do know 5 good men died because we pushed too far into its territory. And I know there are forces that will do whatever it takes to keep that truth from the public. The silence in the woods that night was our first warning. We should have listened. We should have left. We should have recognized that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed, that some wild places belong to ancient, powerful beings far older than us. But we didn't. And now I'm the only one left to tell what happened when human arrogance met a creature that had been watching us, quietly waiting for the right moment to remind us we are not the apex predators we like to believe we are. The creature that killed 5 hunters in under 4 minutes is still out there. And I believe it is still watching, still waiting, still defending its territory against intruders. The question isn't whether it will strike again, but whether we will be smart enough to heed the warning when it comes. In the deepest, most remote corners of the Cascade Range, where the trees are thick and the silence is absolute, something wanders in the dark, a thing that remembers when humans were prey, not predators. A creature that has not forgotten the ancient laws of the wild, even when we have. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I still hear its call echoing through the wilderness, the distant, thunder-like sound, the echo of something old and powerful, reminding us that we are guests in its world, not the masters of our own. And this is not the only place that shelters such beings. The evidence is mounting. Take a look at the photographic proof from the next encounter in this wild country.